biggest benefits.
Is it working? There we go. I'd like to call a meeting to order at 5:30. Welcome, everyone. First thing is the consent agenda items, the minutes of the October 19th school board meeting, special meeting, October 26th, 2020 school board meeting, and October 26th annual meeting. Some professional staffing recommendations. So I look for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Craig? Second? Tom? Any questions or comments? Hearing none, motion from Craig, second from Tom. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes by majority. Next thing is public comment, and we have something to read. I'm going to read the first couple, and I'll hand the mic over to Craig, and then we'll have one on the other side of the room also. Let's see here now. Okay, first one there is, let's see, Aaron Babcock, 4179 Mahoney Court, McFarland, winter sports participation, and I have given my opinion to Paul Ackley. McFarland School Board members, I am encouraging you at your meeting tonight to allow the safe participation of our student athletes starting as soon as possible, allowed by WIAA. I also encourage you to have each sport follow the WIAA guidelines. I understand the dilemma you have in hosting competitions in regards to Dane County Public Health. What I don't understand is why you refuse to stand up for the students of our district. This is about science, not politics. The science says kids can compete safely. Our kids need to be active. One of the top universities in the country, yes, UW-Madison, even recognizes and acknowledges this. By now, most of you know our kids are already participating in activities at a club level. This will continue if the district does not participate in WIA activities. I think it is preferred statement that our kids participate in winter sports through the school. Thank you, Aaron Babcock. Next one is from Jennifer Morris, 6105 Saunders Court, McFarland. I would encourage winter sports to be played under the guidance of the district and WIA rules. These kids need this.
Thank you, Erlen. I believe I've got 3 more. I'll start with the Snyder family. Heather. Hi, I would like to make just a few comments regarding holding a winter sports season. I am 100% for trying to hold winter sports in as safe a way as possible. My boys play hockey. For one of them, that is pretty much the only reason he gets out of bed and does his classwork. His motivation is to do well in school is so that he can be eligible to play hockey. They both have successfully been attending a Wisco hockey camp, and there have yet to be any spread of COVID through this camp. I really like how the McFarland Youth Hockey Association is doing a pod system to keep the players safe, yet also get playing time. The depression my boys will go through if ice time is taken away will be absolutely heartbreaking to watch again. They had the majority of spring and summer hockey canceled, so they have already had to give up so much. It would be easy to cancel a season if we at least try to play and things don't work out. Much harder to cancel the season than decide later to try and make it work. I also feel strongly that if the season is completely canceled, parents will find a place for their kids to play. If parents are sending their kids to different clubs, it is going to be much more difficult to control the spread of the virus, especially if these kids come together to still do captain's ice as a McFarland team. A lot of kids need this as an outlet going into the cold winter months. I know a full season is unrealistic, but even playing 1 game a week for an abbreviated season will give these athletes something to look forward to. So much in their life has been turned upside down. A little bit of structure and stress relief would do them good. I urge you to please allow these kids to have some form of a winter season. Thanks, Heather. Thank you, Heather. Second is from Andy Paulios. I believe he's the president of the Youth Hockey Association. The McFarland Youth Hockey Association stands at the ready to support the high school program in any capacity as necessary to ensure that these athletes are allowed some form of winter sports season during the coronavirus epidemic. McFarland Youth Hockey is now over a month into its season, and we've been able to maintain operations across the majority of our membership despite rising levels of virus in the greater community. The McFarland Youth Hockey Association Board prioritized safe athlete development this season over an extensive competitive game schedule. We've done this in two ways. First, we've updated our rink policy to limit skater exposure in numerous ways, including only one team on the ice per practice, no use of locker rooms or lobby, no parents allowed in the rink, etc. Masks are worn when not on the ice. And secondly, in order to play games, we've formed a pod with a limited number of organizations to reduce overall exposure each weekend. Games are all played in Janesville and utilize very conservative rink rules, similar to what is being done in McFarland. While positive cases do occur in our community and skaters are exposed during their day-to-day lives, overall we feel that we've vastly reduced the risk of transmission during practice or games while allowing athletes the positive experience of physical exercise and personal athletic growth and development. I've heard from so many parents this year that this sort of experience is critical to combating the negative impacts of isolated virtual learning. If the board has any further questions regarding McFarland Youth Hockey Association policies or experiences, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sincerely, Andy Paulos. Thank you, Andy. And the last one I have is from Brad Pavlik to MHS Leadership and School Board. Thank you for the opportunity for our MHS Back to Sports Parent Committee to present last week, Monday. We are hopeful the informed presentation Jeff Kroll presented, along with the heartfelt message from our student athletes, you will determine the health benefits, both mental and physical, outweigh the risk to get our players back on the court, field, or mat. Through all the data available to us, along with positive real-life experiences this summer and fall, we support you developing a policy and creating an environment to provide our student athletes a safe opportunity, an opportunity to practice and compete in games this winter. Just as you have through the years with injury protocols, concussion protocols, blood protocols, spectator conduct policies, etc. I say we, as our committee, McFarland Spartans, is willing to provide their talents and experiences to complement ours if requested or would be beneficial. Strategize, exchange experiences, understand concerns, and together work on a plan to make this happen. You have our support and we are in this together. Personally, I can share safety protocols I have experienced through participating in club tournaments, numerous college visits this fall, and managing my business across multiple states. Being smart, safe, and minimizing risks, but providing opportunities. We can do this with success. We all have seen successful schools, businesses, and communities transform and strive through disruption over the years. We have another opportunity in front of us today to teach our next generation how to assess, adapt, and strive through challenging times. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and support. Be together and go Spartans, Brad Pavlik. Thank you very much, Brad. And I believe we've got one more, Christine, on the other side of two more, Christine, on the other side of the room.
All right, this is from Matt Larson, Dr. Bedell, and school board members. My son, Garrett Larson, is a senior at MHS. He is also a member of the varsity basketball team. I am writing to express my support of the school board allowing the winter sports season for all sports to happen. While there is a great need to get this virus under control and there are no easy answers, I feel it is important for the students' mental health that sports be allowed to occur. It can be done, and it can be done safely. My son, as well as several student athletes in McFarland, have continued to participate in their respective sports throughout the summer. These events have taken place in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. All these events have had athletes and coaches from all around the country. Each event was run in a very safe and cautious way. To date, I have yet to hear of any cases of COVID attributed to those events. As I stated above, high school sports can be done and can be done safely. I realize that these are trying times and no one was prepared for what 2020 has given us. I do appreciate all that you have done in an effort to continue to educate our students safely and efficiently. I hope you consider allowing winter sports to occur at MHS. Thank you, Matt Larson. And the last one is from Angela Wheaton. Have you talked to the superintendent and board president? No. Written comment. As part of the high school hockey discussion, I invite you to please watch a short video created by the Youth Hockey WAHA Region 4 Southern Pod members that includes McFarland, Stoughton, Oregon, Janesville, and Beloit. This video describes the pod system in detail, which I believe could be a viable option for the MHS team as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up will be the school board reports, and the first report is the high school winter sports season report. Jeff Instead, Paul Ackley.
Thank you for letting us come and speak and get a plan together and let you know what we're thinking. Paul and I, if you don't know, have offices right next to each other, and I think we've talked about this subject daily for sure, if not multiple times per day, trying to put something together to meet needs of our students. We've come to the point that we believe it's a puzzle. You can see the 4 pieces here: public health, the comments that we are in, WIAA, and of course, then the school district itself. We've concluded that even though it's a puzzle, it's pretty clear these pieces don't fit together. And so there's some conflict between these pieces. So we're just going to lay our cards on the table, share with you tonight what we think we can do in a safe fashion, and get the practices going possibly first and go from there. So you can see our recommendation here, and we'll go through how we got here. We do believe we can provide a safer environment for athletes to practice winter sports. When we say safer, we are comparing to other clubs, other non-school affiliations. We think we can provide a very safe environment. We believe we can offer safer physical environments, strong and swift responses should something happen with COVID, as well as be sure we can communicate much more quickly. We believe that we have shown we can provide a safe environment, what we've done so far in the past, and we have controlled this environment. Athletes want to be back here, and we will require and demand of coaches and players all of our guidelines. So, piece number 1 is public health. Public health has been very clear and consistent through the pandemic. They've been very clear in describing their directives. They've been very clear in their guidelines, recommendations, as well as measures. McFarland School District has followed public health guidelines from day 1. We've been consistent with meeting their expectations, and when we've had questions, we've contacted them and have always gotten answers back. So we believe that we have good practice in following these guidelines and can follow these guidelines in this situation. WIAA's second piece. Paul's asked me not to state my political opinion about WIAA, so I'm just going to say this. They have made it very clear that this is a local control decision. In last week's presentation, you saw some highlights of studies and surveys that were supported by WIAA. And it's pretty clear, I think the first two bullets of athletes reporting increased depression since school closures is indisputable, and inactivity in our youth sports, or in our youth is on the rise without high school sports. That's indisputable, more than likely. There has been pushback as far as this third bullet point, and there's materials out there that I know. But we're not here to discuss whether or not everything is accurate or not there. We are here to discuss our plan. The Badger Conference has also cited and kind of taken on WIA's voice or motto of local control. And so they have decided to not support a conference schedule and make the decision back to the schools. The Rock Valley Conference has been discussing competitions, but have not just talked about practices. We will have more specific information for you after November 5th, when the Rock Valley Conference meets to make some decisions or recommendations. The Rock Valley Conference has schools in 5 different counties. This has made it very, very difficult for us to come together because we have directions from 5 different counties, public health departments. So this has been tough for us to be together. We're spread out in a pretty large area, so we are still working on it. And hopefully we will have some direction after November 5th. So I'm going to hand this off to Paul, and Paul will give you the specifics of what we're trying to do over operate at this moment. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Finstead. Appreciate that very much. Thank you, board members and community members that are here tonight. Obviously, a topic that definitely needs good conversation. So I'm hoping tonight that we can lay out a plan, as Mr. Finstead has already talked about, but then also share with you, and that's kind of my role here tonight, is share with you exactly how we're going to do this, and how we would like to do this, and how we foresee us being able to do this successfully. So in our next slide, going over there, Nolan, thank you so much for being here tonight and helping us out. We're going to talk about the McFarland School District Safety Plan. We as a district have been working very hard since the summertime to provide opportunities for our student athletes. I, as well as the high school administration team, have worked side by side with our district nurse, buildings and grounds department, and we have come up with successful opportunities to allow our student athletes to participate safely. We've established a return to activity guidelines that parallel the public health Madison-Dane County policies, as well as our district policies. We have created and carried out cleaning procedures for equipment being used, which will be discussed in future slides. We have established, and we'll discuss in a little bit later here in the slides, traffic patterns, as well as entrances and exit points to ensure social distancing with our athletes at all times. We have shown, and I want to make sure I say this very clearly, we have shown that this can be done in a variety of our athletic programs. This summer we had the opportunity to work with our boys and girls basketball programs, boys soccer, volleyball, football, cross country, baseball, softball. All took advantage of our WIAA contact days throughout the summertime, indoors and outdoors. Following the guidelines, wearing masks, social distancing, having entrance points, exit points, things of that nature. So we really worked hard with our district, our buildings and grounds department, to ensure that. Next slide, please. All right. So this slide here just kind of gives you a little idea of what this would look like for our winter sports. And again, if you go back to the Badger Conference slide and the Rock Valley Conference, just understand that in this particular season, we are in 2 different conferences for our athletic participation. The sports were listed underneath the Badger Conference in your packets, board members, of what we're in for the Badger Conference and then also the Rock Valley Conference. So just kind of giving you that, making sure we're all on the same page. So in meeting with buildings and grounds and talking with our high school administration, we would look at practice blocks of time. That would be from 3:30, so after their school day is completed, just like if we were in face-to-face learning, to 8 p.m. The reason for the 3:30 to 8 o'clock is to allow us time to stagger start times if needed, bring in teams at different times at different locations within our school, and then also allow our buildings and grounds department to have enough time to clean the facility after we have completed our practices. So we'd be looking at holding our practices on campus from 3:30 to 8 o'clock. And again, or being done sooner. We'd have designated entrances and exits like I talked about earlier. Our next slide will show you that, as well as restrooms designated for use. What we found out in the summertime is that that wasn't really needed. The kids, the student athletes and the coaches did a wonderful job of using their own facilities at home and then coming to practice. Our practices were about an hour to an hour and a half in length. So not a very long practice. Typically when you're in a normal season, you would have right around a 2-hour practice depending on your sport. But we noticed that that wasn't an issue, but we also know that our restroom facilities are open for our staff members and our employees in the district that could be used. All practices and all sports will follow, like I said, our district and public health guidelines. So just some smaller bullet points down there, and I'll elaborate a little bit on each one, but again, going along with our mass gathering rules that we have in public health medicine, Dane County, we would have 10 or fewer athletes per group. We would have facilities split into 2 separate areas for our cohorts. Cohorts would not mix in regards to coaches and or athletes. They would be designated in a cohort, and I'll get into that a little bit more in this next slide. And we would have masks being worn by coaches and athletes, and we already did this summer, where we were doing basketball, indoors, volleyball, football, soccer, baseball, all of these activities. Even in the hot, humid days of August, or July, I should say, our kids were out wearing masks, and they followed that rule very, very well. They want to be back here. They want to be back with their friends, back with their coaches, and I know that they will follow these guidelines. They've shown us that, and I know that they will continue to do that. Drills will be designated that provide social distancing, and we know that right now in public health medicine, Dane County, they're not allowing scrimmages amongst your team or activities within your team unless you can have the social distancing. So an example would be if I come in to a basketball practice, let's say, there would be 10 athletes on one side of the gym, 10 athletes on the other side of the gym. They would be social distance, wearing masks, coach would be masked, and they would be doing their individual drills. We would make sure that we could do partner activities in our cohorts. It is okay to share a basketball or piece of equipment within your cohort, just like we do at our elementary schools when we have recess. And so we would make sure that our cohorts stay the same. We're not intermixing, we're not scrimmaging, we're following our rules and policies set forth by our district and public health. Next slide, Nolan. I'm going to kind of go up to the screen here, if you don't mind, and just kind of give you this visual. Mr. Faust, Bill Faust, our Buildings and Grounds Director, and I walked our facilities just last week to kind of give us an idea of what are going to be our traffic patterns in regards to our cohorts that we have. And again, this just gives us our school, so it just gives you an overview of where we're at. This is our athletic entrance down by our foyer area, where we have the We Are Spartan Strong mural, I guess. So if you were in cohort A2 for a basketball practice, you would come in a door that would have a sign that says A2, cohort entered here. You would then travel through that foyer area, come into this door right here. There would be poly dots or poly spots set out around the gymnasium for you to put your sit sack down, put your clothes down, because we're not going to put them into the locker rooms, okay? And they would go ahead, they would put their tennis shoes on, they would get ready. There would be a ball there already for them that they would use throughout the practice, and then they would practice on this side of the gym. If they are in cohort A, they would come in on entrance X, which is down by Mr. Meinhold's office, kind of by our team locker rooms, kind of by Jay Hansen's athletic training area, and he would come into this door. So you can see that in the same gym, they're always going to be on their side of the gym. They're going to have separate entrances and separate exits. So we would not have any kind of mixing or gathering at entrances or exits. You can see I've laid out the same thing in B1 and B2. I won't go through every exit for the sake of time or entrance for the sake of time. But you can look at it in your packet, and if you have questions, you could ask us. Pool for our boys swimming program in the wintertime now. We would work with Stu Schaefer, our aquatics director. He has been working with the pool That's been open, I believe, Jeff, since July. And so he has done a wonderful job. Stu just is an extremely organized person when it comes to entrances and exits and making sure that everybody is following the rules. The pool is marked with X's, just like you see out in our society where you have the dots down or the markings for your athletes. The one, let's see here. The one area that is not obviously on here would be our ice rink, but I've also met with our rink manager and our boys hockey coach, and we've gone down to the rink, we've walked through the facility. They have, as you have heard in our public comments, they have set up really wonderful protocols down there to allow entrance and exits into the rink safely. They have socially distanced their chairs so the athletes can come in. They come dressed and ready. They have a smaller duffel bag. They put on their helmet, their gloves, and their skates, and they're out on the ice and working. Again, we would split the rink into two sides. So a cohort would be on one side and another cohort would be on the other. So again, this map just kind of gives you an idea of what we can do at the school, but I've also taken into consideration what we need to do on our off-site facilities. Okay, next slide there, Nolan, thank you. Cleaning procedures. So again, this is something that we work very hard on to make sure that we've had the right products to use for our coaches, our custodians, and our athletes, student athletes. We would make sure that when they are coming into the entrance, there's a hand sanitizing bottle, pump system, whatever it's going to take. Typically, it's a big gallon jug that the kids just put a little pump in their hand, put their hands together, rub it on, and then they're right into their area to go. Kids have really done a great job, to be honest with you, of bringing their own hand sanitizer. So when you give them a water break, because obviously they're all bringing their own water bottles, they're going to go, hey guys, when you go over to get a water, just put some hand sanitizer on quick. And they've done a really nice job of doing that and making sure that they're being proactive in making sure that if they are going to be sharing a ball or being in a group activity within their cohort, that they're keeping themselves safe. We have sprays and disinfectant wipes that we use on our equipment. We've used them on our basketballs, our soccer balls, the footballs, bats this summer. All of these types of activities where kids are going to be grabbing them or holding onto them. So we want to make sure that we allowed for enough cleaning supplies, which Mr. Faust has been phenomenal in using district funds to provide us with those supplies. The other thing would be is the coaches. You know, we're nothing in our athletic department without our head coaches and our assistant coaches. We are blessed to have the men and women in our department that we have. They've taken this very seriously. They want to work very hard to get their athletes back. And they've done a wonderful job of making sure that they're cleaning the equipment appropriately and after practice, so that when the next group would come in or the next practice would occur, that the athletes have clean equipment to use. We bought not only extra cleaning products, but also some extra equipment in itself to make sure that we can ensure this. So those are the cleaning procedures that we would be using throughout our practices. And then last slide here. You know, in the conclusion, we feel we are able to provide our student athletes with a safer environment, like Mr. Finstead talked about, for our practices here for our winter sports. We have had the opportunity to demonstrate this during the summer, and we know that our student athletes will benefit this in these opportunities mentally, emotionally, and physically, as we've heard before. Mr. Finstead and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. We are looking forward to the possibility of getting our athletes back in action. And please let us know if you have any questions as we go out through tonight. But again, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your efforts in this. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question. When you, I followed you along on everything on the courts and ice, but what do you do? What happens in the pool? I do not know what happens in the pool.
Good question. So I've been to the aquatic center and I've watched a few practices. Our sharks are practicing currently right now. And what they're doing is they're using what are called mega lanes. So you come in masked, you come in ready for practice, you go to your area, you put down your stuff, you wear your mask right up to the pool, and then you take your mask off, because in public health Madison-Dane County, obviously you're not going to wear a mask when you're swimming. They look at that obviously as a choking hazard. The pool our pool now has 10 lanes, but I would go down one lane and come back. Like if I'm going down in lane 8, I would come back in lane 7. So really there's only one person per lane the entire time. Typically in a swimming practice, you have what are called circle swims, where if I'm in lane 8, I would go down on the right side of lane 8 and come back on the left side of lane 8 while somebody else is kind of like a two-way road, you know? So we've spaced it out, we've lengthened it out. The pool allows us very negative pressure. The ventilation system in our pool is probably the best room that we can have to circulate our air, as well as chlorine. And we're not worried about respiratory droplets when it comes to being in the pool. Did that help?
Yes, it did, but I was wondering also then, when they come into a meet, how do they do a meet? Do they do the same thing?
Right, so good question. I haven't necessarily seen a meet myself, but swimming is considered a low-risk sport for our public health Madison-Dane County. Individual swimming is considered a low-risk sport. So swimming relays would not be allowed within Dane County, but individual swimming events would be. And what they would do is, you're obviously having your own lane in an event. Okay, and so you would have 8 lanes of competition. You would have your own lane in your event, and then you're socially distanced on the deck while wearing a mask. And I have seen some pictures of Fort Atkinson, Milton, other schools outside of our county that are hosting swim meets, no spectators, just the event essential personnel, so officials, workers, coaches, managers, athletes.
So are they doing the same practice on those meets, or are they going to stay into their lane, or what are they
Yeah,
doing?
oh, sure, you're asking about the warm-up opportunities?
No, the other, if we go ahead with something like this and you're in a different county,
Yeah.
is there different rules then?
Typically, you're going to follow your county guidelines, but you're also going to follow your conference rules or guidelines as well. So the Badger Conference is spread out, I believe, over 6 counties, and the Rock Valley would be spread out over 5. In the Rock Valley, I know we would say that every school in that conference is going to follow the guidelines in which the superintendent set. When it comes to the Badger Conference, I don't know that specific answer right now, Ron, because I haven't had the opportunity to go to events, but I would make the assumption that yes, they would be following their conference guidelines.
So then all of them would be complying the same then? It wouldn't just be that the county has their guidelines, there'd be a conference guideline.
It would probably be a mixture, but I could find out more about that. I could ask some of the Badger Conference athletic directors about that.
And then the basketball games, we see how practice is done, how would the basketball game be done?
Can I ask that we wait to talk about competition till the next meeting?
Oh, this is just about practice?
Yeah, this is about practice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry, I thought, well, one leads to the other one, and I guess I was jumping.
Yeah, tonight our focus is really on practices. That's kind of our first step in this process to try to allow our kids
All
back in
right.
our gymnasiums.
Not the answer to the competition.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Benson.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. When we talk about the individuals that will participate, they're student athletes. So they're students first. Now, are there going to be the same requirements in terms of attendance and work completion and grades going into this as in a normal year, or have adjustments been made because of the way we've changed the learning style as a result of the pandemic?
And that's the question.
Well, generally, if a student isn't performing well academically, they're ineligible to participate in sports.
Code of conduct will remain.
Okay, does that apply to practices as well as competitions, or how does that work?
Good question. So our code of conduct, when we talk about it, we have guidelines in which they have to follow academically. Now, if a student becomes academically ineligible, it doesn't necessarily hold them out of practices, but it does hold them out of competitions. So it's kind of that balance, right? We want the student athlete to still be involved with our team, our practices, the opportunities that we have. They could even, many of them still travel to the contests, but it wouldn't impact their practices, but it would impact their competitions if we would get to that point.
Okay.
And our code of conduct would remain, because the student athlete would register just like they typically do.
Okay. And then part of that registration, does that involve a waiver or an acknowledgement of the inherent risks in participating in the sport?
Correct. So at the very last page of the code of conduct, there is and through the registration process, it is our district statement that we've had for, oh my goodness, probably 15 years at least, talking about that there's inherent risks within WIA sports. We acknowledge those and provide the right to participate.
All right. And I'm assuming that would cover the risk of contracting COVID?
I would probably just double check with our district administration and our legal counsel with that, but I would assume it would, yes.
Okay.
I hate to use that word assume, but.
Well, I think that's something we should consider.
Mhm.
And then I just wanted to make sure, when we're talking about the numbers, that we're including freshmen, JV, and varsity levels?
Correct.
So it's everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So typically in our boys basketball program or girls basketball program, we're going to have 45 boys approximately, and roughly 25 to 30 girls approximately. Our swimming program would be roughly those same numbers.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Over to Christine.
Thank you, Jeff and Paul, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. Thank you, Ann, for asking about numbers. I just want to be clear about which sports we're talking about. So I know you mentioned basketball and swim. You mentioned, is wrestling?
Yes, so wrestling is a co-op sport with Monona Grove. We do have roughly about 10 student athletes in our wrestling program. We have a girls hockey program. We have a dance program. And we have, let's see what else tonight, boys basketball, boys and girls hockey, boys and girls basketball, wrestling, boys swimming, and then our dance. Now dance is not considered a WIAA sport, but it does fall within our athletic department and the code of conduct and things of that nature.
Great. So I'm trying to think about the practices. So what I'm hearing you say is that as they're doing practices, they're not going to be scrimmaging, which I did hear clearly, but not coming in 6 feet. And is that part of this?
So typically how we've done this is in the summertime, they would have an area, an entrance that they would come in. When they come in, coaches would be there to meet them, making sure that they're distancing themselves throughout their entrance time. And then they would come into the gym where there would be designated marks on the floor where they could go to, which would be 6 feet or more apart, because we're only going to have 10 athletes on the ice or on the court or in the room. So they would have designated areas, and then once we would start the practice, then according to our public health Madison-Dane County guidelines, a lot of our practices, I would make the assumption, are going to be skills and drills, individual activities or partner activities. But yet they would then have their area to go sanitize, get water, and come back in, and it would be that group of 10 working together the entire time.
Right, but
Is
they're
your
not.
question is will those 10 be within 6 feet of each
Yeah,
other?
I'm trying to think
during
about
practice?
wrestling. I guess I don't know enough.
So it's hard to imagine wrestling 6 feet apart, right? It kind of defeats the purpose. It's kind of like trying to practice football 6 feet apart. That doesn't really work too well. The Packers demonstrated that on Sunday. So what I would say is this. Mr. Finstead was happy about that. I've talked to our wrestling coaches, Coach Vogt and then Coach Peterson, and they have adapted their wrestling practices with USA Wrestling standards to work with Bulgarian bags, they're called, or dummies, and so they would be working on conditioning, different types of maneuvers, different types of throws. They wouldn't be working with another individual.
Thank you. And honestly, that piece is a small detail. I think one of the greater concerns I have is just the space. So if people are rotating in the same space for 5 hours, and we know really the concern isn't so much surfaces, it's more aerosol, and all of that is sitting there. Just all of the potential for virus transmission is sitting there. That's a little bit more of my concern. So I guess that leads to my next question, which is what kind of protocols are in place for when people test positive, and coaches, and I'm guessing you're expecting that's going to happen.
Correct, yes. So we have set that up with our district nurse, Kristen Strong, in response to how we would react if we would have a positive case of COVID. It is in our activity guidelines that we would follow that, and it's also in our district policies in regards to how that would move forward. So you could read that, kind of the cliff notes of it would be that this cohort where the positive situation occurred would be shut down for an extended period of time, whether it be a 14-day quarantine, the coach, the players, and then we would reestablish that after we've met all of our district protocols. Does that help?
Oh, yeah. So then what I'm also wondering is, and I know the basketball team, like even the boys basketball team has multiple coaches, so, you know, heaven forbid anybody does test positive, the next cohort wouldn't have a coach then. So you're gonna have to have extra coaches to help with those cohorts is what I'm hearing.
So right now what we're looking at is, using your basketball example, we would have like Coach Meinhold would be the lead coach for cohort A1. And Coach King, the varsity assistant coach, would be the coach for A2. And then maybe Mr. Feldner would be for B1, and so on and so forth. So we've spaced our coaches out so that if that particular cohort was shut down for a particular reason, the other cohorts would be impacted without having a coach. Mm-hmm. We've done that with our hockey as well. We have Coach Smith and Coach Tuma, where we would have 2 sheets of ice. If Coach Smith's group would have a positive test or a situation where they could not continue practices, we could still hold the practices with the other cohort with that coach.
Thank you. And then 2 more questions. So I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been, reading and looking at the information that was shared last week, and I appreciate, Jeff, you saying we don't want to go over that particular study, which was not scientific and we should not extrapolate any findings that they had from that. So I really want to be clear about that one, because there is the impression that there's no chance of getting COVID by playing sports. And we could pick apart that study. I don't want to do that. But the other 2 studies about depression and mental health, I want to get back to, that's not necessarily because of being athletes, and that we have a lot of high school kids who are depressed who are not athletes. And so, I think that's a really important point to bring up, because we have to think about all of our students and their mental health. And sports is one aspect of it, but their mental health could be because of all sorts of different things. And what are the opportunities, or what are the ways in which we as a district are thinking about the mental health of all of the students? So I guess that's not really a question, it's more of a commentary on that study, that it's really great to bring that up, but I just want to make that clear, that it's not necessarily about being an athlete. Looks like you want to say something.
Yeah,
Go
I was
ahead.
just say, we're going with baby steps. That we don't
Pardon?
have, and this goes well, now we have opportunities to bring other people in as we can. So it's a slow process, not to diminish or suggest that athletics is more important than something else. It's the starting point. We have to start somewhere. And there's a kind of a time-sensitive piece for athletics, because seasons do start November 16th. There's a start date that we want to make sure, if we can do this, that we hit that start date.
Great. Okay, and then my last question is particulars about, I'm really confused about WIAA. I mean, I love your piece of the puzzle, because you're like, it doesn't fit. WIAA and the Rock Valley and the Badger conferences, like, what are the differences in policies right now, just to get us up to speed?
WIAA has landed on local control, so they're not going to cancel seasons. They're not going to tell us what we can and cannot do. Any protocols that they have established actually fall in line with what public health has said. The Badger Conference, company time follows that, they're local control as well. They're not going to sponsor a season, but those schools can schedule games and do what they want to do that way, whatever their board says they can do. And the Rock Valley has had several conversations, and there's a meeting Thursday to land on the competition piece.
And that goes back to Arlen's question earlier, Christine, in regards to, hey, if we're in boys swimming and we're going to travel up to Sauk Prairie, if that's something the district will allow us, then we have to follow, they're going to follow their guidelines of their public health department. But also, considerations and guidelines. The conference will have consideration and guidelines in regards to some of those events and how they're going to be run. So that's still a piece of the puzzle that, yes, it is confusing, because you have three different separate entities, the two conferences and the association which govern those two conferences, and the governing body is giving you considerations, but you can travel to other counties in the state and see football games, cross-country meets, volleyball games, basketball games, probably starting up here in the winter. So I can understand where the confusion comes in. The bottom line is your county health department is going to trump all of those associations or conferences in which we have to follow.
Well, thank you so much for that clarification, because now that brings up a different thought of mine, which is, so I understand that we are the only school in Dane County for Badger, right?
For the Rock Valley.
Rock Valley, sorry. And for Badger, so if we do move, and I know we're not talking about that tonight, so this is more like, I'm not even asking a question, but if we do move to contests, as you call them, we might be in different counties that have different guidelines.
So for example, let's go with our basketball scenario. If we would be in competitions outside of our county, we would be following our Rock Valley Conference. We'll be meeting again on Thursday, but the indication that I get is that there's going to be a set guidelines in which our conference is going to hold so that our events are done safely, which every school would then agree upon that, to do that and make sure that in order for us to go down and participate, if possible, we would be following those guidelines.
One of those guidelines are what we do for fans in the stands, what we do for who's essential personnel, how we handle locker rooms. Those are all questions that aren't answered yet, so that's why I asked if we could not talk about competitions yet, because there's just too many unanswered questions at this moment.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Thank you so much. That was all really, really helpful.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the questions.
I have another question.
Sounds good, Arlen. I'll walk over next to you. We'd like an interview here.
How about the testing, to make sure everybody's, are we in a routine, are we gonna, how often do we do that, or do we want kids to, you can be a carrier and not have any, so I don't know anything about it, I was gonna ask, are we gonna be doing it?
Testing would be up to individual families in that particular situation. And I guess that would probably be a question that is going to be, I could best address with our district nurse. But right now, there wouldn't be any testing that's done to the school. If we would have a positive test, we have policies and protocol that deal with that. If we have an exposure, one of our athletes is exposed to somebody with a positive test, then we have policies and protocols that would then take care of that situation as well. We would ask them to take a test prior to coming back and provide us medical clearance. Some families choose not to do that, and so then they have to stay out for their quarantine time.
I would add, it would be, the daily routine would be very similar to what happened when we walked in here tonight. Someone's going to ask you, have you had any symptoms? Have a fever? Athlete would sign off no, and that's we are going to ask our athletes to self-monitor themselves and be honest about those symptoms. So it'd be similar to what happened even coming in here.
In the sign that I think probably Lauren or Melissa held up tonight before you came in asking, are you experiencing any of these symptoms? All of those signs in the summertime were made and put on the doors of the entrances. And like when I would come out to meet the kids that were coming into our weight room, I would say, now if you're here, you're showing and telling us that you have none of these symptoms. And that we're trying to provide a safe environment, and then go from there. And then they would come in, hand sanitize, and then start their cohort work.
I've got a couple of things too. Thank you. In terms of the Dane County Madison Public Health Department, based on the results of the various and sundry lawsuits that were brought, and it appeared as though at least some of the judgments implied that Dane County, Madison Public Health, they have their rules. Are those rules requirements or are they recommendations? It seemed as though the lawsuits, the judges kind of neutered their rules and made them more recommendations rather than a rule that they can enforce.
Because, you know, your job, for the most part, the requirements.
Jeff Mahoney can answer that question.
So, Craig, the question kind of hits upon a lot of different areas. I think tonight to kind of respond to the piece that would be impactful on athletics, both practices and in a couple weeks, games, is Dane County Public Health, let's use the term, Public Health, Madison, Dane County. Don't worry, I've butchered that several different ways over the last, since March 16th. There are requirements for when you're in Dane County. If you are in a different county, you have to follow that other county's rules. Public Health Madison Dane County has, since the start of this, routinely said, we want you to follow our guidelines or the most restrictive guideline wherever you are in the state of Wisconsin. At this time, if practices were to occur outside of this county or a game outside of this county, we would have to follow public health of that county if the board allowed for travel, whether it was practice or games. In regards to the injunctions, the lawsuits, those were mostly in regards to going after how school districts could operate or private schools could operate. And as you know, there are lots of private schools that are operating. And certainly we'll get into a little bit of a conversation under item 5A. I'll talk to you about some things that are coming down the pike with public health. Does that answer your question, Kurt?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And the other thing I've got is more of a, I guess, commentary or comment than necessarily a question. But given what we saw with the Badger football team in the last week or so, my concern might be that how can we expect to not have a significant breakout as they did when you consider all of the hoops they jumped through there in an effort to keep their players healthy and safe. Daily testing, immediate contact tracing, things that public high schools aren't going to be able to do. So the fact that they had what the last I saw was 22 positive tests in the last week, the fact that happens to them, it just raises an issue to me, and that we can't be as safe and as protective with our kids as they are with their athletes.
I can't answer your question. I know I'm right with you.
Yeah, but it raised, because all we've heard for a few weeks is that it's safe to do athletics. Nothing, it doesn't be transmitted, athletes don't get it, it doesn't be transmitted through them. And that just raised the red flag for me, the way that they, and I please treat my ignorance if that's what it is. Maybe they are handling it in an appropriate way, but when they're talking about canceling a game or maybe two games, and they don't have any wiggle room built into the schedule, that's pretty significant.
I think, Craig, again, probably the best thing, and as you've heard us talking earlier this evening about, there are so many puzzle pieces that what we wanted to do was make sure that the conversation about McFarland High School activities moving forward in some capacity is more of a conversation for this community. I think we could spin our wheels on what's going on in every other community, every other county, the WIA, the Badger Conference, the Rock Valley. And I think that's why Jeff and Paul put a real focus on this evening of how are we going to handle things in step one as far as just getting through and getting started with some practices here in McFarland. So.
I didn't mean it was a
Nope.
But I did.
Any other questions? All right, well, again, thank you so much for your time and listening to us. And we know that if you have any other further questions, you know you can always approach us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the district administrator report.
Thanks, Arlen. This will be very brief. On your table in front of you for the board members, there's a Dane County COVID-19 data snapshot. That information is there for you. We're not going to go through that report. There is some interesting things about that last snapshot, which did relate to several of the local municipalities in Dane County having either above average throughout the county versus below the average in the county. So good information. If you're ever curious, because we are in different counties, it's certainly to look at other counties like Rock County. All of that data is on their website as well. Certainly if we did start to see, if we were to get into activities that crossed the counties, we would probably be wanting to be mindful of what's going on in those counties as well. The other document reads school call notes 10/29 of 20. This is an update that the superintendents receive weekly on Fridays from Public Health Madison-Dane County. The largest and biggest takeaway item here is on page 3, where it gets to Public Health Madison-Dane County school reopening metric recommendations. A group of 19 superintendents since early April have been meeting. They have been getting updates from county officials. And one of the biggest challenges for that group of 19 superintendents that include both Dane County, also some from Rock County and some from Jefferson County, have been the discussions of, okay, we've brought in K2 students. We're seeing really good, I don't want to say good positive things because when positive is negative. So I'm just going to kind of reiterate, we've had good success with our K2 programming. Many of the other school districts in Dane County that have operated that have had success. What we haven't seen is that Dane County hasn't pulled back K2 even though their own metrics say we should have already been back in a virtual world. That has now led school districts like Wanakee to move forward with 3rd and 4th grade and are now starting to discuss how they're going to bring back plans for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and they haven't mentioned 9-12 yet. But that has caused, if you read through this, that Public Health Madison-Dane County is looking more at the science, looking more at the metrics, looking more at what's happening with some of the successes that different districts have had and the models that we've had. So this is not, we don't have a presentation on this tonight. However, I just want you to be aware that other districts are starting to push in Dane County for kids to be in school, even if it's in a hybrid model. And we'll be getting discussions as an A-Council to start mapping out if Dane County shifts their thinking, how will we react come January 26th with our reopening plan? So we, as an administrative team, have already begun that conversation. The good news is you had many of your buildings that had already been able to plan out a little bit based on that AB model, 4 days a week. We one time called it the 4K for all plan because that's kind of how 4Ks operated so successfully, or daycares did early in the spring. So we'll continue to build forward plans and monitor public health mass in Dane County and look for how we might be transitioning into school for students at the different grade levels after January 26th. There's a lot of other stuff you can read in this document, but good information. Questions on that? Christine?
Do you want me to hang on? I say it.
So when I'm glad you said that after January 26th, because when I'm trying to make sense of their comment here of Dane County and the state of Wisconsin are experiencing the highest average of positive cases and hospitalization rates than at any other time in the pandemic. Our average case counts are above most very high or critical thresholds established in school reopening metrics across the country, and accompanying that guidance in our plan and other plans do not advise further reopening. So they're saying not now, they're saying in the future. Gotcha, okay.
The other item, if there were no other questions, item 5B, future school board meeting dates would be November 16th. Again, location would be here. And then December 7th and December 21st, again, the 5:30 time frame, tentatively scheduled again for here at the middle school, so that if we are in need of space, which I think many of our meetings will allow for more in-person conversation, we would hold to that schedule if the board is fine with that. That concludes district administration report.
Are you still doing the weekly all stuff with the superintendents from the county?
Yes.
Any other questions for Jeff? All right, we'll move on to action items. First action item, discussion and possible action on McFarland School District winter sports season practices. The floor is open to the board. We have to make a motion? Okay, sorry. Motion to discuss the action item.
I'll move to discuss and possibly take action on the sports practice.
Second.
Second.
Great. Thank you, Ann. So any comments or on the board? Kristen?
I do have some comments. I actually wrote them out because I've been giving them a lot of thought. And similar to all the decisions that we've had to make in the previous 8 months, we know that this is not one, or this is one with a lot of complicating factors and competing interests and tensions. So I've been doing a lot of reading, and I've listened to and appreciate the material shared in public comments last week. And I've also been approached by a number of parents of athletes and not of athletes about starting winter sports practices and who are not in favor of this. And really there is no easy answer, but in this case, what's emerged and has become clear to me as I represent many others in the district, not just me, I do not support the beginning of sports practices at this time. And the reason why, and I'll explain my reasoning to be very transparent, is I don't feel it's in the best interest of the school district overall. And let me explain why I'm saying that. Since we shut down in March and planned over the summer to open the school to in-person learning as soon as possible, we've had to repeatedly change course, with the most significant change in my eyes when we decided to stay online until at least January 26th. It's clear from our current data that Wisconsin is a hot spot of COVID, and the trend is not getting any better. And we will not be able to provide in-person learning until this virus is contained and the number of cases decrease. And this past week has been particularly rough in Wisconsin. The R0 value, which is how quickly the virus transmits, is over 1. It's 1.10, which means for every one person who gets it, at least one other person will get it. And that means the spread is exponential. In the past week in Wisconsin, 272 people have died, and I'm saying 7 days. And the new positive case daily rates are between 2,800, which was the low from last Monday, and a high of 5,200 on Saturday. The total number of new cases since last Monday is 38,256. In Wisconsin, the highest and fastest growing rate of confirmed cases is in the age group of 14 to 17. By the week of October 25th, 9,186 youth in the age group of 14 to 17 had tested positive. And when you look at the numbers in Dane County in particular, the highest number of confirmed cases behind 20 to 29-year-olds, which makes sense, UW folks, for them it's around 4,800. The age group of 10 to 19 is second at 3,470. Many positive cases in this age group are asymptomatic, while others are affected severely. And when we discuss issues of equity, which was brought up, current data show both racial and ethnic disparities in relationship to COVID. The data does not match up. White kids comprise about 50% of kids in the country, but account for 14% of the childhood deaths from COVID. Black children make up 14% of our country, but account for 29%, so double. And both Hispanic and Native communities have bigger disparities than both of those. So this is an issue of equity when we look at it that way. But regardless of race and ethnicity, all positive cases, asymptomatic and symptomatic, have the ability to spread the virus to others. I know the goal is to provide an experience whereby the students and coaches do not get it, but we know the risk is not zero at this time. Winter sports are unlike summer sports and fall, and that they are practicing in closed spaces and breathing heavily when practicing and playing. These are the perfect conditions to both spread and catch COVID, which is airborne. In these conditions, when someone has it, it will spread. Parents are telling me they are concerned about the choice that they will have to make with their kids. Do they put their kids and families in harm's way and play, or face the consequences of not participating, not having playing time, and other negative fallout and outcomes as a high school athlete? We have students, teachers, and families in the district who have been sheltering in place for 8 months because of underlying conditions and the mortal risk of catching the virus. I am most concerned about these individuals, as well as the players and coaches and everyone they come into contact with, their family and the community. The one, and even more probable, the few, will be vectors for increasing numbers in our village, Dane County, and Wisconsin. So as a board member in this current moment, right now, my greatest concern is providing the best learning environment for students and the best working environment for teachers and administrators. Primarily online is not the ideal situation at all, yet we will not be able to move back into our schools if the numbers do not decrease. By us starting practices and perhaps moving into games, we are not working in our best interest to moving into learning in person and in schools. We're actually actively working against that. So why would we as a district do something that is not helping us move to in-person learning for all students? And what moral and ethical imperative do we have to be responsible and ensure that we are doing the right thing in the decisions that we make, especially decisions that have significant consequences, including those that are life and death for our community? I'm almost done, I promise. I understand that the mental health of many of our students is not good, and that is due to multiple factors. Yes, it is the lack of sports, but it's also the change in the way we're doing education, and what is expected in grading and other educational and academic factors. It's due to not being able to play their instrument in orchestra or perform in a play. It's been a change in our family's dynamics, meaning we're with each other all the time, in financial situations. It's due to sickness and deaths of those we love. So yes, our students are suffering. All of us are suffering. This has been an extreme disruption to our lives. I do think we need to think about the mental health of our students, and at the last meeting, a number of concerns were brought up that I want to address specifically. If your child is depressed and suicidal, please seek help for them immediately. If they're using drugs or alcohol, the same holds true. That concerned me greatly. Please seek advice from their pediatricians and therapists, and I know that our school counselors and psychologists can help you. But as I mentioned earlier, if we do this and contribute to the rise in numbers, it will be even longer before we can get all of our students and all of our teachers back in the schools, and that ultimately is what our goal is as a board and as a district. The short-term sacrifice now and true investment in doing no gatherings helps the whole of the district in the long term. So that's how I feel.
Any other board member has a comment?
Not so much a comment, but I've got a question for you, Paul. And just ballpark is fine. What percentage of our high school students, male and female, participate in athletics once or more?
Throughout the entire year or through the winter time?
No, I think in general throughout the year.
I would say, looking at our athletic numbers, I would say we're throughout if I take the student body of roughly 750 students in our school, I would say easily 70% of our students, if not more. And again, please don't hold me to that number.
No.
But I would say, looking at our numbers, if I'm doing the math in my head, I would say right around 70% are going to be participating in some type of sport throughout their high school year.
Thank you.
I have a comment because I've been wrestling with this at home and watching the news like everyone else, and it didn't look good for me. And I'm very conscientious for all the students with what's going on in Dane County. And our numbers right now, I can't believe where the state of Wisconsin is where it's at. It's just incredible. I thought we were working in the right direction. Things was kind of coming down, and I'm very concerned about that. And I had some parents talk to me that got smaller students in the school, but they say they were concerned that if we get something and it spreads and we have kids out, we have staff out, and if we have staff out, we don't have replacements, then we have a lot more kids out, and there's a lot on the table right now. This is not an easy decision to be wrestling with. I understand how the kids want to get out and play the games. I would be the same way, and I think the parents want to see them out there playing the game too. I'm just not sure it would be the safest thing for the district. And that's what I think I have to wrestle with personally.
I hope that everyone can appreciate what a difficult decision this is. It's pretty much a no-win situation because you can't please all of the people, and very rarely are you able to do that. I struggle with this decision for the reasons that Christine raised, but then I also understand how important it is to a big segment of our student population, at least at the high school level here. And I recognize how much this whole world has changed in the last year, and allowing kids to practice might bring a little bit of normalcy back, but there's that inherent risk, not necessarily of injury, but of contracting this virus and then passing it along. If I were confident in student athletes, being at home, doing their schoolwork at home, going to practice, going back home, and not being elsewhere in the community, I would feel much more inclined to say yes. But I don't know how much interaction these kids have with the community at large. So I don't know yet exactly how I would vote on this, because I would hate to see a situation where we have a COVID outbreak within our school system and it affects numerous students as well as staff, because that affects so many more people than just the student athletes and their parents who decide whether or not they can participate. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Tom, you have anything over there?
You can go first if you want.
No, go ahead, Tom.
I gotta figure out how to turn this on, I guess.
How's this working? I'm leaning in favor of it, and I'll tell you why. I don't think we can control what kids do when they're not in school. I don't even want to pretend that we can. And my guess is they're going to find other ways to participate in athletics. It's very important for mental health. It's very important for physical health. And I have a little story about Halloween, because we didn't get as many Halloweeners this year as we did in past years. But I did a little poll of some of the kids, and many of them went to sleepovers, and many of them had parties. And so I questioned whether going to Halloween was actually safer than going to a sleepover and a party with all their friends. My point is that we're going to have community spread. We're going to have kids be exposed whether they're in school or out. Here we have procedures, we have protocols in place. It's probably less risk doing their sports in school than it is doing their sports somewhere else that may not have those protocols. So at the moment, I'm kind of leaning for it.
It's, again, I don't think I need to echo this, but I'm going to. This is really brutal. This is a very, very difficult decision, and this is one of many. As most of you probably know, I support athletics and have supported athletics since I graduated 50 years ago. I think there's a part of me that wants to just shut things down, and until we get a vaccine and there's zero risk in something, I'm not going to do it. But I just don't think that's realistic. I don't think we're ever going to have a zero risk situation. Again, being a realist, I think a high enough percentage of our athletes are going to go find sports someplace. And I would echo Tom, I think, in that if they're going to go find sports somewhere, I would prefer it be here when we have maximum control over their environment and the procedures and processes that they go through. So I think with more hesitation than I thought I would have, that my tendency now is to vote in favor of it.
I also am leaning toward voting in favor of allowing practices to begin, but I hope the participants understand that if things go contrary to how we hope they go, that they may not be able to continue. And so they need to realize that what they do and how they conduct themselves and how they, I guess, interact with others will play a major role in whether or not we can see this successfully through to contests or anything else. But I think it is worth a shot to try it, and hopefully with the plans that are in place, it will be successful. But there's no guarantee that it will continue if things go south.
As a board this evening, you went into with a motion and a second to have discussion on this topic. You do have a possible action item on this. Prior to that, Arlen, did you want your medical advisor, Dr. Tom Merwin, to address the board? He is here this evening.
Sure.
Hello, and thanks for letting me speak. First of all, I want to commend the school board and the district, school district administrators. So many of these decisions that you guys have dealt with since this whole thing happened in March, and so many more to come up. It's a daunting task. And I agree with so many of the sentiments that have been expressed here, that school is, getting the kids back in school should be our #1 priority. I'm glad we've got K through 2 and have a plan to go 3 through 5, but there's a lot of kids who are missing out on stuff. And I also agree with this plan because it gets another avenue of getting kids back in their normal school routine, whatever it is for them. I would love to see the district get the choir back in and the band back in and the musicals back going, but I know this is baby steps and we got to take the steps that are safe to take. And if something happens, there's plans in here to shut things down, even if the coaches and the kids don't want it to, and that's why I support this. I also saw some sleepovers coming back after Halloween, all these kids going to sleepovers that are in the younger age groups that they're out trying to live as normal life as they can. So I just wanted to say that I do support this piece of the puzzle, and there will be other pieces that will be coming up that we'll be talking about as well. And I welcome any questions if anybody has any specific questions.
I have a question. Now, and I understand we're dealing with practice time here tonight. We're organized practice and stuff like that. Now I know there's traveling teams. There always used to be traveling teams. Kids would go out with a group. Is that still happening? So are the kids that they're
out participating with a club team or even a local team that has to leave the county to participate.
Besides our team, they play outside then too, regardless, huh?
Yeah, 2 McFarland teams go to, well, just in my example, my granddaughter plays on a soccer team. She traveled to Fort Atkinson 2 consecutive weekends to play another McFarland team in Fort Atkinson. And that's all parents, maybe 2 back. They do, for 10-year-olds, I think they do a pretty remarkable job in terms of see a lot of pushback when I walk through the school over K through 2, when they're in person. I don't see them picketing with masks, I don't see them without them. I, for one, didn't give the kids the credit that they deserve beforehand. They're doing a great job. I'm sorry, Robert.
No, I just, I mean, we were dealing with a controlled system in this district. And I didn't know how big a wrench that would throw in it when we have a traveling league that's not a controlled under our standard. That is that opening an avenue for something than what we're expecting to go on. Doctor, could you answer that maybe? Would you know how that would be?
So there have been, throughout spring, summer, and fall, there have been people traveling to Lodi to do practices, hockey teams going other places. It's happening whether the school wants it to or not, because these kids want to practice, these kids want to play in games, and these parents want to get their kids into something because they can't get them into school. So yeah, it's going to happen whether we support it or not. So I think doing it this way, again, it's a controlled environment that, at least for the high school kids who want to participate, you're going to have a better control over what happens because they got to live by our rules.
Christine?
Did you have a question?
I guess I want to, I don't want to say push back on that a little bit, I guess I do, because that's parents and families' choice. If they choose to do that, that's on their conscience. Once we start with sports here, it becomes a choice in quotation marks. If people want to be a part of the athletic program as a high school and say they're a high school athlete, they have to do it. It's not choice anymore. And that's what I'm hearing from people who anonymously came to me and said, I don't want to say this in public. I'm afraid of the retribution from coaches, from their kids, and other parents. So we're taking that away by saying, you know, they either go and have a high risk of getting COVID, or they don't play and they lose that kind of, you know, street cred of being an athlete because they're not. And what kind of a choice, how do parents make those choices when your kid is saying, I want to play, you know? Well, grandma's sick, you know, grandma could die for you playing sports. I mean, the number of hospitalizations, we're at 85%. My sister is a nurse, she oversees 90 nurses. And I said, Carolyn, what would you do? And she said, you don't want to ask me because I'd shut the whole state down. They're having 20 minutes, they get one-on-one with someone as they're dying. That's it. Nurses are leaving. She said, this is not to be taken lightly. And she was an athlete. I mean, we need really to think about, this isn't just, you know, little consequences, this is life and death.
But isn't that the same decision that parents are making in K through 2? When we went in person, there are some parents that said, nope, I'm not doing it.
Right.
And that may be, I mean, each family's gonna have to wrestle with this.
Right.
In whatever place they're at.
That's true.
With whatever their specific certain situations are, so.
Right, and they could choose WEVA, for example, and have, which is an analogous experience. We don't have an analogous experience for sports if you're not going to do it.
You know, club sports you could do.
Right, but if they're not, you're putting parents in a really tough situation. I just want us to recognize that. And what is that one thing? It feels like we're saying, well, we'll do this until what? Until someone dies? Until what is the consequence where we say this isn't, you know, this isn't worth it? And I'm saying this as like my current thought. My current thought is because of the data. This doesn't mean it won't be better in 2 weeks. In fact, it's never going to be better if all of us keep making these choices. So, or, we talk about baby steps. Maybe it's swim and another sport. Maybe it's not all of them. But I am worried about bringing 100 or so kids back in closed, confined spaces for 5 hours. 5 hours or 5 days a week. I mean, that is a setup for COVID spread.
And I don't want to discount that. I mean, I think that's very important data point. But there are other broader considerations as well. I mean, I really don't think that regardless of what measures are put in place, I just don't want to be having the same conversation a year from now. Because there are things we can control and things we can't control. And I really don't think we can control the virus. I mean, there's too many people that are individuals that want to do their own thing. The same is true with the athletes. The same is true with the kids. And I'm actually concerned also that the kids that will get to play then are those kids that have money to play. And they can afford the travel, and they can afford the club team. And we're cutting out a huge segment of kids that want to play, need to play, and I think they would benefit from playing. And I don't want to have money be the dividing factor for that. And yes, I think we may have to go backwards, just like in schools, we have to go backwards. But I don't think the solution is not going forward.
Actually Arlen and raised a good point in I hadn't really thought much about if we should decide to move forward with okaying practices in our facilities. Is it reasonable to ask that the athletes that are participating in high school sports, athletics here, not participate in their club sports simultaneously? Because I see if we're gonna open up practices to our kids, I'm not comfortable, I think, with those same kids simultaneously participating in club sports in other areas throughout the states. I think if that's going to be the case, then I would probably reconsider my vote, only because once we get this control over these kids here, we still don't have any control over them wherever they are with their club teams, or however that's going to work out. I don't see it as an unreasonable request or requirement that if we do vote in favor of moving ahead with high school practices, that we ask that those athletes not participate in club or AAU type sports.
I just have to say, I think that's overreaching. I mean, if you want to go that route, I think then what we should say is you should not visit grandma. And you should not stay with your family. You could stay overnight at the school. And we're not going to go that far. And the fact that they're competing in another program probably isn't as dangerous as if they go out to a restaurant. And we're not going to control that either. So I guess I disagree with that point of view. I think all we can do is work with what we can control and what we have authority over, and I don't think we can overreach beyond that. And if we're not comfortable with that, then the answer is no, we're not going to do it. But I'm comfortable.
Tom, I think that's a really good point that we can't control, but somehow we do set up expectations for kids' behavior in classes and in sports, such that we could set some guidelines about what they are or are not doing. When Jonah went to college, before everything shut down, he had to quarantine for 2 weeks before he got there. He had to take his temperature every day and tell them exactly what he was doing to go play football. Now, 2 weeks later, everything was shut down, but we could make expectations for them about what they can and can't do. I'm not saying control, but if they're gonna make choices, then the choice is, if you're gonna be an athlete, we don't want you exposing everything to other people, within reason. You will be doing, you will maybe not choose to do some other things. I think that is reasonable. I mean, it's the safety and the regards for all of the team and the coaches. And I think when you put it that way, I think people are more willing to do it. I think that's how we got kids to wear masks, right?
Any other discussion? I tell you, this is a hard road to hoe. I don't care how you want to look at it. There's things out there, yes, we have our reaching too far. We have a lot of faces to look at, a lot of homes to look at. It sure be appreciated if people could, if we get our sports, get our practices lined up, it goes smooth. We set up later on the seasons to go and play. That you're playing for your school team, you're keeping as close to home as you can. That if you weren't on a traveling team playing also. I mean, at least you're with it organized in your community. Because it'd be very tough to have something bad come out of it. We all would have to. And I understand that, but I sure wish that we could put some teeth with it where you're not in a club, you're committed to the program. We're starting our practices, we're gonna have another meeting about setting up the season and make something happen. And that to me is less selfish if you do it that way than if you just wanna have it all. Because we have a lot of kids in this district, a lot of families. That's my opinion.
I don't know how you're drawing the line at other sports activities. I guess I haven't heard that they have caused any problem over the summer and in the fall. How are we going to decide what are the high-risk activities that these kids are going to have to refrain from engaging? Like I said, how do we know that playing in a club team is any more dangerous than going out to dinner every weekend? I don't think we have the expertise to know whether that is a dangerous thing or not relative to everything else they're doing. I just can't go that far.
I understand that, but I'd like to add, we were on a decline. We're coming into the hottest point the state has been in on this whole process, this whole virus. That's what's different. When we were declining, when we had our numbers coming right down, but now everything's taken off, and when you're a hot spot in the nation, you better start looking at something and respecting that. All of us have to. At home, in the neighborhood, all over, we have to respect that. I'm not saying yes or no on anything, but I'm just saying it sure be a nice thing to do that have the people just play their home team. That's just my opinion.
I think why that came up, Tom, is because that was part of the presentation last week. Was, I think what was said was, well, wouldn't it be better if we had the kids here playing? And it came up tonight in the presentation as well, that we can control the environment. So if that's the argument you're going to make to do it, then that should be part of how it gets implemented, I guess. That's why.
Right.
That
You can control the
example.
environment. I mean, I can't control whether somebody's wearing their mask the proper way when they're not here, right? And so that's all I'm saying is all we can control is what we can control. And frankly, we don't know if the virus is continuing to spread like it normally would have, because it's, I mean, when you look at all viruses, get on that exponential slope, and you don't know why or whether precautions we would have done, can't say they would have stopped that slope. And so I can't say that stopping kids from doing things in their private life is going to somehow affect what's happening here at the schools. All I can control is what happens at the schools.
Can I ask a procedural question? Can we modify the motion at all? Is that part of the procedure?
You don't have a motion on the table right now.
Okay, okay, thank you.
I think another reason that I am more comfortable with approving this limited return of some of the students to practice is that I think it's all of our hope that come the middle to the end of January that we could bring our kids back into the schools. And this will be helpful in determining whether that's realistic. And so I just think that's another reason to take this baby step, to see if students can get back into a school environment and keep COVID from becoming a huge problem.
I think, again, I guess trying to be a realist, if I thought there was a reasonable chance for a vaccine in the near future, and if I thought that we could ever get to a point of zero risk, I would think my thoughts would be in one direction, but being the realist, I don't think we're going to have a vaccine in the near future, and I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we can say we have zero risk. I think we mitigate the risk that we've got as best we can. We control the environment as best we can. And then there's just a lot of hoping and praying, I guess, that, you know, that the faith that we've put in our administration and our coaching staff to make this as safe a venture as is possible for our kids. You know, Christine's arguments are 1,000% valid, and they certainly are thought-provoking. I just feel like at this point in time, the good that I believe will come from this, I hate to say it's worth the risk, but I guess when you get right down to it, that's the decision we're making. Is it worth the risk to have practices? And at the end of the day, I think that's a decision that each of us is going to have to make it on our own, I guess. Anyway, that's how I feel about it right now.
Recognizing that the schedule is laid out for the next few weeks, I know that on the 16th, I believe, we're talking about contests, right? I know that's not tonight. However, I do want us to think about the decisions that we make, because we are going to get into a situation where if the decision tonight is to move towards practices, are we going to be comfortable saying no games or yes games? Like, what are the kids practicing for then? So we're kind of getting into a slippery slope of how far are we going to go, and I just want to think about that because it's already on the agenda. So it's something that we'll have to consider.
I think, Christine, to answer that question, again, was presented as a schedule to the board. board president has the ability to decide what's on the upcoming board meetings after this evening's. So that is still a conversation that and can be looked at. That is administration's recommendation, is that we would have conversations coming up in regards to that. But again, procedurally, the board president actually sets the agenda or finalizes. While we make recommendations, what's on there, it ultimately can have multiple topics on it as well, just so everybody understands procedurally that that can occur.
Any other discussion on this? Do I have a motion? Do we do a motion on this? To accept the whole winter sports practice? Can we do that? Can we change any, can we do anything different to the language if you wanted to state it, or state them to not play outside or not? Probably not. The practice. Okay. Okay, so we got the motion from Ann, second from Craig. For the action of the McFarland School District winter sports season practice.
I'm sorry, can you state the motion again? I didn't quite hear exactly what we're voting on.
Action, possible action on McFarland School District winter sports season practices.
So is the motion to allow the use of the facilities for winter sports practices? Is that essentially the motion? Okay, thank you.
Typically, it might say on there, I guess, the administration recommends so-and-so, such and such. It just doesn't come out and say that here. I think it's understood that we're voting to either accept or reject the plans that John proposed to initiate practices here at school.
Right, to allow practices, students to return to practice for athletics.
Yeah. And then after that, it'd be one for competition.
Yeah, that's a completely separate issue.
Separate issue. Okay. Motion from Ann, second from Craig. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 4-1. Next is action on McFarland High School early graduation requests. McFarland High School administration recommends approval of the attached high school early graduation request. So I have a motion to approve. Ann? Second?
I'll second.
Christine? Any questions or comments?
One of the letters is very, very nicely written and really shows the caliber of students that are producing it. Yeah, I think we're preparing our students well.
Any other comments? Hearing none, motion from Ann, second from Christine. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes by majority. Next is action on McFarland High School Spring Early College Credit Program request. Administration requests approval of the attached spring semester early credit program recommendation for 2020-21 school year. Do I have a motion to approve? Craig? Ann? seconds it. Questions or comments? Tom?
Just wonder if you could remind us what the criteria is for acceptance or denial of classes? Has that changed?
The guidance is if we have a course that we offer that's equal, then we deny it. If we don't offer that course, our building will accept it.
All right, thank you.
Have you had to make any accommodations due to the pandemic such that students aren't able to take courses here and are able to take it at Madison College, for example?
Correct, they can take it at MATC.
Yep, that's awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Motion from Craig, second from Ann. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Opposed? Passes by majority. Next is action on recommended WEVA, Destinations Career Academy and Inside School of Wisconsin are requesting approval of the recommended student transfers back to their resident district due to lack of engagement. Do I have a motion to approve? Which one?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Ann seconds it. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Motion from Craig, second from Ann. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes by majority. Board comments. Anything the board would like to share?
I just wanted to thank all of the administrators who put together some learning modules and letters concerning tomorrow's election, recognizing, of course, that some students may be happy with the result and other students not, and that it's important to recognize that we need to respect the outcome, and we need to respect each other, regardless of whether you're happy with the outcome or not. So I think it's important, because there's too many people in this country that right now that don't necessarily recognize that you can still be friends and be civil with people who don't share your same political ideology.
All right. Any other board comments? I'd like to say this was quite a discussion tonight on this motion to pass the practice stuff. I think this virus stuff is on everybody's mind, and we all own it. I think it's something we have to sleep on, sleep with, and always